What terrifying confession has someone told you while drunk? Thanks for the replies. I read them all, it's been fun to read. I have two. I had a housemate in college who several years prior had accidentally shot and killed a friend of his in a hunting accident. He went to trial and was acquitted of all charges. Years later, he didn't tell me, but he told a woman I was intimate with that it wasn't an accident. Years ago, when I worked at the Las Vegas Hilton, in the main kitchen, I had a very high-strung boss named Hussein. He was from Turkey. We jokingly referred to him as insane because of his personality. Once, after our shift was over, he grabbed a case of beer from the supply walk-in refrigerator and invited a few of us to help ourselves. He probably had 4 or 5 himself. He then proceeded to tell us that when he lived in Turkey, he had kicked some guy's ass and came to the US to get away. My co-workers and I really didn't give it too much thought. About a month later, we came to find out that, while on vacation in Mexico, Hussein had been walking back to his hotel room after drinking at a bar. He had ducked down an alley to take a piss and was caught by a policeman. He was charged and convicted of public urination. At least at the time, the US didn't have reciprocity with Turkey, but Mexico did. Well, it turns out that what Hussein had described as kicking someone's ass turned out to be murder. He was taken back to Turkey, where we assume that he spent the rest of his life in a Turkish prison. The movie The Midnight Express portrays what life is like there. It was me who did the confessing. When I was 18, I was sexually assaulted on a bridge in the middle of the night when I was all alone. My mum works in hearing, and she had always told me to bite someone if I got into trouble. So I did. I bit into his neck until my teeth met again. He fell down, then I ran all the way home. A few weeks later, I read in the news that a serial assaulter had gone to the hospital with neck wounds and later died. They'd drawn it down to him attacking someone and them acting in self-defense. I never told anyone until I got really drunk with my boyfriend last year and spilled it. He couldn't believe I'd kept that secret. A friend of mine died from a drug overdose. After the funeral, a mutual friend of ours and I were getting drunk when he broke down crying. He asked me if I remembered the time when he and our dead friend told me about an accident that they'd witnessed where they saw a truck driver die. I told him I did. He then told me the most ducked up shit. He said that our friend ran up to the dying man and stole his wedding ring, and that the man couldn't do anything but look up, terrified, at our friend as he was being robbed. I knew they were bad into drugs, but I never thought they could do anything like that. I grew up with them. They were like my brothers. I don't really trust anyone completely anymore. No drugs or alcohol involved. But I have somewhat of a similar story. A few years ago, my mom witnessed an accident. A lady was texting, blew through a red light, and boned the truck with an elderly man driving. My mom jumped out of her car and held on to him while waiting for an ambulance. The girl who hit him, early 20s, was freaking out and called her mom. The mom showed up first and kept telling my mom, just tell the cops he ran the red light. No one will know. And he died. My mom heard his last words sounds. Really? That she repeated for weeks. My mom cried for days. She met the family, and it was the man and his wife's anniversary, or something like that. We obviously told the cops the truth, but we don't know any of the follow-up. His obituary is framed on our wall. I hate to think the last thing he heard was just tell the cops this was his fault. My best friend disappeared for a while, presumably left town. We were both in our mid-20s. He came back after a month or so, and he'd take me out every night drinking and partying. I wondered how he was able to blow so much money on drugs and alcohol, but he wouldn't tell me. I saw him pay our tab one night and he must have had 12 or 15 grand on him. After coming back to town, he basically stayed inebriated at all times and wanted to hang out with me whenever he could. He'd come over to my place after closing the bars down, and we'd often keep partying until morning. He would usually end up breaking down and crying to me about how he can't live with himself over what he did. He wouldn't give details. Night after night this would happen, until he broke down again one night and told me he was paid a lot of money to do some bad things to bad people. He confessed that he was paid by someone in his dad's gang to burn someone's business down over a money dispute. Then he told me he killed a couple of guys who were thought to be molesting children. He said he was given a handgun and a shotgun and was paid $10,000 after each man was executed. More than 10 years later I still don't know if I believe him or not. After he came back he was so ducked up and depressed. If he was telling the truth it would make sense. He kept doing drugs and drinking until about 5 years ago when he had a heart attack at age 27. He quit using drugs and alcohol, but the damage was done. He suffered another heart attack 6 months later and died a few days after his 28th birthday. He was the funniest and kindest person that I've known, and I miss him. My mom was in another state for business. A company flew her crew out to Texas to discuss a change in software and offered their company, and so it was just my dad taking care of me. I was about 10 and he came to tuck me in one night, but he has incredibly hammered. He opened the door to my bedroom, told me I was a mistake that saved them from getting divorced, and good night. Worst part is he didn't close the door completely when he left. When I was 14 my mom took me and my sisters and a couple of our friends to the beach. My sister 15 and I got our own room with our 2 friends and wound up meeting some boys and getting drunk. My sister's friend 15 female was really drunk and got super upset and confessed that her stepfather had been sexually molesting her, raping her for years. Really horrible stuff. It sobered everyone up fast. We rallied around her, told her we were there for her, yada yada. But when we got home from the beach trip a few days later I knew I needed to tell my mom. After I told my mom she got the state police involved. There was a trial and the man wound up sentenced to 8 years in prison. It turned out he was doing it to the younger sister as well. At a family gathering my grandma got tipsy and started to tell stories from her childhood. While she does this every time, no matter tipsy or sober. Guess it's just a normal grandma thing. This time it took a dark turn. She told us his story. That is the reason she hates to go to the dentist and particularly hates the drilling part. She told us a story about when she was 6 years old. During WW2 my family lived in Hamburg, Germany, right next to the harbor. During a particular week in 1943 the city was continuously bombed and over 35,000 people died and more than 100,000 people were injured. The houses that were hit mostly burned down, creating a huge fire with such force that I sucked not only oxygen in, creating strong winds, but also people. The fire created such heat that people running out of their burning houses got stuck in the molten asphalt on the streets and burned to death. As it was all happening around her, that particular smell was present for over a week in her part of the city. Drilling in your tooth creates exactly that smell. My grandma had to stop the dentist as she recognized the smell immediately. This story shook us to the core as it came out of the blue. It still sends chills down my spine. One of my best friends since middle school opened up to me the day we had our last day of high school. We had been partying all day, got off at 10 AM, but most people left at around 3 PM to go get ready for the seniors dinner and after party and whatnot. My friend stayed behind with our class president. I told him I'd pick him up for the dinner and left when I got back. Both were falling down drunk and in tears. A few years earlier, our class priest had lost his father. I take my buddy back to his house so he can get changed for the dinner, and on the way he tells me what happened. They had kept drinking when everyone left and eventually got to the topic of their dads. I had never met my friend's dad. He died and that was all I knew. I never knew how he died. It turns out my buddy's dad was a lawyer or something in the country he's from and was being extorted by a gang. When money started to run out, my buddy's dad sent the family to another country and told them he'd meet them there, that he had to finish some things up. A few weeks after moving they learned that he had been murdered by the gang. It completely ducked my friend up. We always used to drink heavily and whatever since we were in high school. For me it was just drinking. For my buddy it was numbing the pain. It was ducking shocking when he told me this and really made me understand him a lot more. Why he acted how he acted. Shared an off-campus apartment with a very cool older guy in college. He was a nurse. Got up super early every morning to do his shifts. Every night you could find him at his regular Irish pub. They let me drink there without ID because they knew I was with him. Basically a super high functioning alcoholic. One day I came home after finishing my exams. He brings out a bottle of Jameson to celebrate. It was about 2-3 full. After a few shots he starts telling me about his time in Vietnam. I'd known him for 2 years and he had never brought it up. And I had never asked. I knew he was a vet, but assumed he had been a nurse. Nope. Special forces. I'm not military, and I'm sure I got some of the actual military stuff wrong, as you shall come to understand. His demeanor totally changed after a few drinks. He started telling me about having to go on covert operations to carry out assassinations of civilians. Said he dreams of the faces of all the people he killed. We ended up polishing off the entire bottle. He got up the next morning at 5 AM and went off to work. I spent the entire day moaning in bed and praying to the porcelain god. We never spoke about it again. I believe he was part of Operation Phoenix. I remember reading up on it after that night. I overheard a murder confession. I was at a resort in New England with my family. I went onto the balcony to smoke. I could hear people talking somewhere above and to my right. They were very drunk. The man said he was going crazy with guilt. He shot someone over a drug deal and he drives by the memorial all the time. I couldn't tell which unit the people were in. The man had no discernible accent. He never mentioned a city name or anything. No details at all. I really wish I could have helped solve a murder. Police officer arrived at a stabbing call as a backup unit and ended up transporting the suspect back to cells. He was extremely drunk high. He started talking semi-coherently in the backseat of my PC, and I was mostly ignoring him. At one point he said something like, "And this isn't even the first time I've done this. She was so young." And then he started bawling. I flipped on my recorder surreptitiously to see if he would say any more, but he didn't. He just cried and cried. Intox confessions are generally useless anyway, and once he sobered up and spoke to his lawyer he denied having any knowledge. I talked to our major crimes guys, but don't think they did anything with it. I still wonder though. It wasn't bravado. That's for sure. Click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.